Good evening, and thanks for joining us for our online devotional tonight. In the book of Genesis, we meet a man named Joseph. And when we first meet him, he's a young man, and he is the favorite son of his father Jacob. And, well, quite frankly, he's kind of a spoiled brat. And his brothers, there's a lot of tension, and his brothers end up selling him into slavery in Egypt. And Joseph is a slave, and then he ends up being falsely accused of a crime and being put in prison. I mean, things are just not going well. But God is with Joseph. And at one point, God allows Joseph to interpret the Pharaoh's dream. And Joseph is released from prison, and he ends up rising to be the second most powerful person in the entire kingdom of Egypt. Now, eventually, Joseph is reunited and reconciled with his brothers, and his brothers express their remorse for what they did and everything they put Joseph through. And in Genesis 50, verse 20, Joseph says this about everything that happened in his life. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph saw God's hand even in all the awful things that he had to go through. Part of the life of faith is living with uncertainty. We are never promised by God that he's going to make everything great for us if we follow him. And there are people who are going to try and tell us that they know what's going to happen, that they can tell us what's going to come in the future. And if this last year has taught us anything, it's that we don't know what the future holds. I mean, just recently we had, who would have thought that a bunch of gamers would go on this website Reddit and could have thrown all of the experts on Wall Street into such a tizzy. We do not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And as we walk into the uncertainty of the future and whatever comes our way, whether that's good or bad, whether it's full of joy and pleasure or sorrow and suffering, can you and I face it like Joseph faced it in his life? Do we really believe that God is ordering our steps as we seek to follow him? Do we believe that God is sovereign even when things don't seem to go our way? Do we continue to believe that God is good and trust him even when bad things happen? You see, how we understand what happens in our life makes such a profound difference to how we will live as we go forward. Many of you know the story of Corrie ten Boom's life. Corrie ten Boom's family hid Jews during World War II, and they were hiding them from the Nazis, but eventually they were discovered and arrested. And she and her family were sent to a concentration camp, and sadly, some of her family died in those camps. But Corrie survived, and she wrote to tell the story, her story and her family's story, and she talked about her faith, and she would also be invited to speak to audiences. And when she spoke, she would often look down while she talked. And she wasn't reading notes as she did this. She was actually working on a piece of needlepoint. After sharing about the doubt and the anger and the pain that she experienced, Corrie would reveal the needlepoint to the audience. She would first hold up the backside of the needlepoint and just reveal this jumble of colors and threads, and there's no discernible pattern to it. And she'd say, "This is how we see our lives." Then she would turn that needlepoint over to reveal the design on the other side. And Corrie would conclude by saying, "This is how God views your life. And someday we will have the privilege of viewing it from his point of view." There's a lot happening today that is confusing and troubling and just looks like a big jumbled mess on the backside of a needlepoint. But God is still working. God is still present. God is still doing good. Look to him, trust him, and one day we will see the other side. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and again, thanks for joining us tonight.